In this video, I'm going to show you the steps I took to transform this 2D drawing into this 3D render. Let's start with a reference. A few years ago, I made this rig for a short project I was working on. It's not that great, but it's a good starting point to reference the block out with. And in combination with my drawings, I had a decent idea of where to start. I built the sculpt from scratch with basic shapes to keep the proportions accurate, so that I have a good base mesh I can work from and start retopology with. I'm still learning topology, so I'll try to keep this brief. For this segment, I'm just preparing the model for texturing and rigging by lowering the density of the poly count. This basically gives the rig more flexibility with its deformations, allowing me to squash and stretch the character as I see fit while optimizing the software's performance. For the topology, I'm mostly just making the loops and then filling in the gaps. For more complex models, there's a few more things you'll have to consider, but I don't encounter that here. For the arms and legs, again, I can connect the loops by simply establishing the faces and filling in the in-betweens. I basically do this with the rest of the body before moving on to texturing. After filling out the flat colours for the clothes, I decided to use a custom brush I made in Photoshop to get a more stylized look for the clothing. You can do this by clicking on the wrench in your sidebar. By then opening brush settings and clicking on texture, you can then click new, just below the checkered icon. After that, you can select an image by clicking the small icon in the corner and then selecting your file by clicking open. Just make sure that the outline of the texture is white and the background is black or transparent. And now your texture should follow your pen. With the custom brush enabled, I added some patterns based on a rough sketch I made in Photoshop. I'm sticking to sharp shapes like triangles and squared spirals to give a very jagged look for the character's shape language. I experimented on the colours for a bit, but I eventually ended up desaturating the trouser patterns to give better attention to the other parts of the character design. And then finally, I added some contrast by adding colour to the hair and eyes. With the textures finished, I wanted to redesign the paintbrush given that using the old one just wasn't going to work. It's very bland by comparison and doesn't fit the vibe of the character at all. So I drew a concept for it in Photoshop that was more colourful and expanded on it in 3D. After it was modelled, I got to texturing it as faithfully as I could with a few small changes. And with a bit of rigging, I added it to the finished character and considered it done. After finishing the rig, I wanted to make the shading more interesting by striking a balance between a painterly and blocky style. So I made a shader that allows the character to look like it's been hand painted using an image texture. How it works is I take the paint map that I made, then I map it over the normals of the model in order to give it the illusion of a hand painted look. I've put the node set up on screen so you can try it yourself. Before putting everything together, I made these off camera and they're available for download. So if you're curious about the materials or you simply need models for your projects, everything on screen will be available for free on my Gumroad. The link is in the description and I hope you enjoy using them for your own projects. Now that everything's in order, I wanted to improve on the composition of the original scene by pushing the perspective. So I came up with a solution that was pretty simple. By scaling the trees in a way that feels more influenced by perspective, I'd be able to create the illusion of more extreme foreshortening in a way that complements the camera angle more. So after adding everything in the scene, I scaled the objects to a reasonable size and started blocking the position of the trees. After that, I posed the character roughly to gain a sense of what pose I wanted the character to be in. I'll be making changes to this later though, since I wanted to prioritize getting the environment set up first. After adding the grass, I thought it was a good time to start making the sky texture. Given there's not a lot of stylized textures for the night sky, I decided to make my own. So I used an image texture as a base for the sky, before adding a color ramp node to make the sky blue. I then made a gradient with a slightly warmer hue to add some contrast before darkening the sky's edges. And after some final adjustments and extra details, I managed to get a good result. With the environment mostly prepared, I revisited the pose of the character. I ended up recreating the pose in the original drawing and just made the gesture less stiff, in addition to adjusting the face's expression. To finish off the render, I darkened the trees and sky to put more focus into the foreground. Then I added a white highlight to the hair by mixing the paint shader with a simple toon shader setup. And after some compositing, here's how it turned out. Thank you for watching. If you like animation, consider subscribing, and watch this video next if you want to see how I animated Hollow Knight in Blender.